Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Meeting Halfway with me, Veronica.
And me, Mark.
And we're here with one of our most important guests.
Probably our most special guest yet.
The most special guest we've ever had, and is John Fountain.
What's up, party people? Please, please, please call me F.
Mr. F.
See, people always revert to that, and while I like the sort of respect that evokes, being called Mr. F, I sound like a Sesame Street character.
I know what you mean.
Just F is cool. Yeah.
You hear that, fellers?
Yeah.
Well, for those who aren't aware, he has a Twitter account, and here it is, boom, put up, Bruce, right here. You guys can go follow him because he gives really, really awesome updates and tips when it comes to storyboarding, art in general, and a lot of the work that he has worked on, such as My Life as a Teenage Robot, the earliest, Fairly OddParents, American Dragon, Jake Long, American Warrior, American Dragon, Jake Long. Jake Long, American
Yin Yang Yo.
Yin Yang Yo.
Which is annoying because I actually really like Jake Long. Like, it's like one of my favorite, but I can't say the name right, all of your childhood.
You're also forgetting some of my absolute favorites, the Free Willy 3 CD-ROM animated storybook. That's one of my
really
big ones. Yeah, that's a real thing.
I don't think I've even heard of it.
My first job in Los Angeles was at a CD-ROM company because that's where I got my start in animation, was in CD-ROMs.
That's so interesting.
And yeah, I got hired by this small studio up in the sort of Canoga Park area, and they were doing the Free Willy 3 CD-ROM animated storybook, and it was a little game center too, and it was my first taste of Hollywood because, much to my shock, they made me the art director of this thing, and I'm terrible.
And that was your introduction to.
That was my introduction to being employed as an artist in Los Angeles. Yes, it was my first job.
A CD-ROM for
doing CD-ROM, and this was a huge client for them. Getting free with the Free Willy 3 Activity Center was a big get for them, and they made me. And I had some experience with CD-ROMs because I had been working for a sort of mid-sized, studio in Detroit because I'm a Michigan native. And so I had some experience, and they made me art director of this thing because everyone liked the way I drew, and I had, I think, a very sort of appealing drawing style, which they later decided they hated. What? But so they were like, yeah, we're doing the Free Willy 3 storybook, so I got to be art director, and that meant I got to like come up with some of the games that you play with it, and some of the activities, but all of the characters in that game, except for Willy, were designed by me, and they look like me drawings. Like, they look like I did them, which, when the game came out, everyone decided that that's why the game didn't do well, is because everybody hated my character designs. But
or maybe it was because it's Free Willy 3.
Man, then, it was really exciting for me because I was straight out of the celery fields of Kalamazoo, Michigan, into the CD world of Los Angeles CD-ROMs, but I got picked up by a car that took me to the Warner Brothers lot for a solo screening of Free Willy 3 so that I could get inspired.
Solo screening, just you?
The game. Yeah, just me in one of the Warner Brothers screening rooms watching Free Willy 3, and I was excited. I thought that I have made it big. This is the big time. I'm on the Warner Brothers lot. I am the art director for the Free Willy 3 Activity Center. I'm taking notes, and I went home that night and I was researching orcas and just doing the whole thing. And that's, that is for all of the foibles in my career, that's something I'll always give myself, because I've worked on some garbage in my life, but every single job I've ever had, I've said to myself, I'm going to take this and I'm going to make this the best whatever it is that I possibly can.
Honestly, that's very commendable, because most people, I feel like, being put in situations where maybe they're not entirely pleased by what the subject matter is. I find that, like, a lot of people kind of half-assing certain work when it comes to something they're not passionate about, just because,
Oh, absolutely. Somebody actually reached out to me on Twitter recently, and they were like, I want to get in the animation industry, and I want to work on this show. And I'm like, okay, that's great, good for you, but you know, A, they're probably full up right now, and B, you don't have any experience, and C, you know, to you know, cut your teeth in the animation industry, you have to work on a lot of stuff you don't like.
Yeah.
You know, in between Invader Zim and the Fairly OddParents, I worked on Dora the Explorer, and there's nothing against Dora the Explorer, but I didn't want to work on Dora the Explorer. I'd come off Invader Zim, which at the time was like, this is the coolest show in town. You know, people were clawing each other to work on Invader Zim. I go from Invader Zim to Dora the Explorer, and it's just like, oh, wow, oh, bouncy balls, okay, okay, boots, oh, there goes the bouncy ball. Yeah, it was just, thankfully, Fairly OddParents came almost immediately after that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, because what had happened was I had been doing a bunch of freelance storyboards for Nickelodeon and for things like Chalk Zone and a lot of the Oh Yeah cartoon shorts. And that's where I met Butch Hartman, because he had me do some storyboards for another short that he thought was going to get turned into a series called Dan Danger. And he liked my boards there. And so I was mostly doing, you know, sort of freelance boards for Butch and for Larry Huber on the Chalk Zone shorts, and just kind of, you know, doing little bits here and there. And then it came out that Invader Zim was coming on, and they needed a character designer. And a whole bunch of my friends from Klasky Chupo, which is where I had my first job, working on the Wild Thornberries, they were all going on to Invader Zim to be board artists. And I was given the opportunity to be a board artist on the show because I knew all those guys. Yeah. And if like, I don't like to look at too many things with regret, but if there were one thing I probably would have done differently, it's that I would have been a board artist on Zim instead of a character designer. A, because I'm not that good of a character designer, and B, because everyone who boarded for that show instantly became storyboard ninjas, because that show was so difficult.
Really?
Yeah. That show was... It was so, like, I mean, there were space battles, and there were just things that were so ambitious for anything anybody had seen at the time, that, you know, the board artists on that show worked themselves to the bone to make it, you know, what it was.
The show was a lot of CG too, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was one of the first shows to blend CG and traditional animation, and did it really, you know, again for the time, very flawlessly. It holds up really well. And but I wanted to be a character designer. Like, I moved to LA to be a character designer. That's what I thought I'd be good at, you know? And so, you know, when I was doing all these boards for things like Chalk Zone and stuff, and the opportunity came along to do character designs for Invader Zim, I'm like, oh, finally I can do some character designs. And I was the lead character designer for the first season. But after the first season, you know, the guy that they hired to sort of assist me with character designs, it just became abundantly clear that he was Aaron Alexovich is his name. It became abundantly clear that he was way better than I was. And it was at that same time that Butch was starting to gear up the Fairly OddParents, and he wasn't ready yet. But so Nickelodeon didn't want me to leave, but, you know, Invader Zim needed me to stay or to go. And so to have me do something in between, because once you're in at Nickelodeon, they like to keep you around.
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, if you're going to go from one to the other while you're waiting for Butch to be ready for it, here's some Dora the Explorer shows. So
gotcha.
I did like 4 episodes.
There's like a filler.
Yeah. And again, it's nothing against the show, so please don't, you know,
start
screaming at
John
me.
Fun keeps Dora. Hear that?
Not true.
No, I don't hate her. I just don't like her. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway.
I first found you a couple of years back from Twitter, because it was a post or something about cartoon creators who put themselves in their cartoons, and I first found you from a tweet you made that blew up where you were like, oh, fun fact, that was originally me in the cartoon, and Butch replaced it with himself.
Abra catastrophe.
Yeah, that was, and it's so funny that blew up the way it did, because everyone thought that I'd made such a savage jab on Butch.
Yeah.
And the thing is, that's the kind of sort of good-natured shit giving that Butch and I would give each other, like, all the time. Everyone, and yeah, I mean, I was taking a jab, but it was a very sort of, I felt, good-natured kind of thing. Yeah. It was, for those who don't know what we're talking about, it was the episode Abracatastrophe, which was the first sort of real Fairly OddParents movie.
Yeah.
And it was my first go round as the storyboard supervisor for that show. So it was a huge job to make sure that the boards for that entire movie, you know, sort of gelled together and worked together. So I worked my fingers to the bone on that thing. And there was a scene where, and I concocted this scene where we start out in outer space and then we zoom into atoms. And the way that we zoom into atoms is we zoom in through outer space and go through bigger stuff and smaller and smaller and smaller, and we zoom in on some poor animator working at their drafting table, and we zoom in on their eraser, and then we go subatomic. Well, originally the way I had boarded it, it was 3 o'clock in the morning. I was at Nickelodeon, and everything was pencil on paper at the time, so I had this just pile of papers around me, and I was working on this scene. So I'm like, I need to zoom into atoms, so I'm going to draw myself doing what I'm doing right now and put myself in the scene. Then, of course, the movie comes out, and Butch had changed it to himself. Which, by the way, most creators would have done. Like I said, it never
But
really.
It's on brand for Butch.
It's on brand for Butch, and who knows if I would have done it either. But I do remember thinking, you've been in the show 100 times, you know.
Your voice is one of the
And by the way, this was what I was living at that moment, you know. I was the one there doing it.
Yeah.
So I was a little like, oh man. But
I would feel
you know, my remark on Twitter, it really was just kind of this good-natured sort of thing.
Like a fun fact.
Yeah.
A little fun fact. That was me, not him. Next thing I know, I'm just getting tweets and emails and tweets and emails, and it just went insane.
Yeah, I remember that. I got a lot of like people in the industry coming to me whenever I would talk about Butch. I would have all these different like industry veterans coming to me being like, "Here's my story of Butch Hartman," and I'm like, "It doesn't surprise me at this point." But it just so happens that your tweet came out like right when Butch was at like its peak.
It was like really coincidental.
Well, see, and that's the thing. I didn't really know that much what he'd been up to, and so everybody else informed me at that point. Because here's the thing, and people kind of find this hard to believe. You know, I left the show. What was it, end of season 3 or end of season 4, somewhere around there, somewhere around, like, I think we just wrapped Channel Chasers.
Oh, you worked on that?
Okay. Yeah. I was supervising everything up until Channel Chasers, and I think it was just after Channel Chasers, just before they started doing the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour, things like that. That's when I left, and you know, it surprises people, but I mean, I left the show and I'd never watched another episode since then. Like,
but that's fair. Like. It's kind of like your
Jay Linder was telling us something where it's kind of hard to like watch it without thinking about like what you would do differently.
Yeah, I mean, it is harder for me to enjoy cartoons, you know, the way I used to, because you do sort of sit there going, oh, that was a real missed opportunity, and oh, I would have done it that way, and blah blah blah. But yeah, I mean, and again, I didn't not watch the show out of spite, and it wasn't like, well, I'm brokenhearted, therefore I'm never gonna, you know, I left the show on my own terms, and you know, I had people ask me when I left, they're like, how are they going to do this without you? And boy, they sure did it without me. It just, it kept going and going and going. So, everybody always seems to say that the first 3 or 4 seasons are the best. But that's probably just a coincidence.
Smiles.
Anyway, yeah.
Thumbs up, smiles.
Yeah. I mean, once I left the show, I didn't watch it anymore because there was no reason to.
A good way Jay Linder had worded it was kind of like a combination of, oh, I don't really like how that turned out, or it's just FOMO, like the fear of missing out. Like you're like, oh, I wish I could have been a part of that. Yeah. And certainly I've experienced that as well. It is that thing where it's like it's really tough to remove yourself. Now, fortunately, I've finally gotten back to a place where I've been removed from the industry for long enough that I can sit and like watch something and just enjoy it on its own merits again. Yeah.
So
well, I'm sure that took like years.
It's been at least like 15 years. I mean, that took me, you know, again, being removed from the day-to-day industry.
Yeah.
Because the industry is an animal all its own.
I'm curious, what was the most fun production you've worked on, and what was the most like strenuous production you've worked on?
See, that's always tricky when people ask, because the most fun production I've ever worked on was doing my own pilot for Nickelodeon, because of course nobody can tell me that I'm doing anything wrong with it. Yeah. And you know, and then there was that, and then I had a show that was in development for 2 years at Warner Brothers. Those two things were kind of tactically the most fun, because I was the boss, and
you're the showrunner.
This was my show, right? And I thought I was really, you know, well suited for that. So those were the most. I'm not even going to say those are the most fun, because there's lots of things about development, even when you, even when your pilot gets picked up. Like, Nickelodeon bought my first show, Lock, Stock, and Barrel. They were like, we're going to make this into a series, so here's your big check. We own it now.
Yeah.
And that's why I can never do anything with it again. But, you know, I'm not even going to say that was fun, but it was really satisfying. Like, doing that and then doing my Warner Brothers development deal was really satisfying, but it wasn't that much fun. I mean, it's called development hell for a reason.
Yeah.
So then the second place, you know, trophy goes to, in terms of what's the most fun I've ever had on a production. Never any doubt it was My Life as a Teenage Robot. Rob Renzetti just did a masterful job of running that show in a way that I feel like every creator of a show should run their show. He just created this environment of collaboration, and everyone had a good time, and there was no headbutting and ego clashes and anything like that. We all loved the show. We all loved, you know, the characters, and we all loved everything about it. And Rob is just a ridiculously likable dude. So it was just tons and tons of fun. Plus, it was a show that was not fully scripted. It was my first
Board-driven show.
Well, I don't like to call it board-driven, because it was we received an outline. It's like, here's the outline to the show. Here's what it needs to be. You know, here's some bits of dialogue and stuff like that. It was usually 2 or 3 pages long. So, but we were expected to take that and then do it into storyboards. So we would write it as we go along, but we didn't, you know, we weren't writing it out of nothing. So, but that was a lot of fun, because I do fancy myself a writer, and that gave me the opportunity to really flex those muscles. So
Yeah.
So in addition to the fact that everyone on the show was super nice and everyone got along and Rob was really great, that was the one where, you know, if you want to see, you know, currently a show that's in existence that has the most F-style humor in it, that's the show you go to.
If you're allowed to say, why did your pilot for Nickelodeon like kind of fall through at the end?
The way it worked, it was one of the Oh Yeah cartoon shorts. So if you go back and you look at the Oh Yeah cartoon shorts, and I think if you go on Vimeo and you look up Frederator and the Tantrum, you'll see it. It's up there. And I retweet the damn thing about 400 times a week. So just follow me on Twitter, and
yeah, guys, check it out. Look, we'll put a little snippet right here.
So it came out as an Oh Yeah cartoon, and in the context of the Oh Yeah cartoon shorts, it tested really well, and Fred liked it a lot. Fred Seibert liked it a lot. The Nickelodeon executives liked it a lot. Everyone who saw it, you know, liked it a lot. And it was, you could tell this was a series. Like, this should be a show.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people did their shorts, and it's like, okay, this is a great short, but you can't really see it as the series. And that's, I've never created something that was meant to be just one thing. Why it's called the Tantrum. You watch the Tantrum, and you go, oh, okay, this is a show. And the plot is, it's about a little kid who gets superpowers by throwing temper tantrums. Like, that's the source of his strength. So again, the Nickelodeon executives and Nickelodeon in general and everybody who saw it was really enthusiastic about it. So and this is all while I'm working on Invader Zim. They're saying, we need you to put together a pitch document, a pitch Bible. You need to write 2 full seasons of outlines, 1 full pilot script. They had me do a movie outline, and they're like, we need the supplemental characters, we need the town that he lives in, we need all this information, we need a full Bible.
Can I ask what year this was?
Oh, geez.
Oh, yeah, so late 90s.
This has got to be either 2000, either 99, 2000, or 2001.
Oh, wow.
Was this before SpongeBob?
Would have been
SpongeBob was already
I know it would have
huge.
been around the same time, but like, because it's 99.
SpongeBob was happening. I mean, SpongeBob was already a mega hit at that point.
Because it seems like Nickelodeon at the time, at least, would have wanted something that would have been like a long-term investment, you know?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I think one of the things they had in mind for it was, the Tantrum was a little bit edgier than the Fairly OddParents had been prior to that, but it was less edgy than Invader Zim.
Yeah.
So I think the dream was, they're going to put this in between Fairly OddParents and Invader Zim. That's going to be the greatest thing ever. And it would have been a perfect thing. Like, I remember thinking at the time, I'm like, these guys know what they're doing. Because this is the perfect thing to put in between those two things. You know, it's a nice little sort of palate cleanser from Fairly OddParents, and it'll take you into Invader Zim and sort of gear you up for it a little bit.
Yeah.
So again, they had me do all this stuff, and by the way, paid me really well for it. And what's amazing was, and I still look back on this and I marvel at it, because it's not the first show I ever pitched, but it was the first show I ever pitched to Nickelodeon, and it got picked up. And it got picked up not just for Oh Yeah Cartoons, it got picked up for a pilot, and then got picked up, you know, like I said, they bought the property. Like, they still own it. If they ever want to revive it, they could. So, you know, that's kind of amazing. A lot of people never accomplish that in their careers, and so
gets that far, like, just like
yeah. So you know, so I worked really hard on this Bible and everything, and like I said, I was very enthusiastic about, yeah, you bet, I've got the movie in me. Here's the movie, and here's the plot. And it's funny, I remember I was sitting with the same development executive who, you know, helped bring you the Fairly OddParents. I was sitting with her and reading her the synopsis, the outline for the Tantrum movie, and the ending made her cry.
Oh,
like, and that just made me so happy, because it's one of those things that, like, in every single show I've ever worked on, regardless of what the style was, I always try really hard to elevate it in some way, and that doesn't mean I'm trying to, you know, do high drama or anything like that.
Give it some heart.
Yeah, give it some. I always loved doing that with Cosmo and Wanda on Fairly OddParents, and it was super easy to do on Life as a Teenage Robot. So it made me very happy that, you know, here's a silly show about a kid with superpowers, you know, that he gets through throwing tantrums, and then at the very end, the ending made her cry. So anyway, everyone at Nickelodeon, Fred Cyber, everyone was super duper behind it, and then it came to focus testing. And this is where, you know, with every show, things get rough, because I'm sitting there. I remember it so clearly. I was sitting there, you know, doing my character designs for the day for Invader Zim on the day of focus testing, and I had a mole. Because they're not supposed to tell you how the focus testing goes.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to attend. You're not allowed to know, like, what people say.
I think that's kind of odd, considering it's like your product, but okay.
You'd think,
Yeah.
but I had a mole, and again, this was another executive who was just like, I think he was just banking on this show. Because again, when you champion something, when an executive champions something, if it does well, then that makes them look good too. So anyway, they're focus testing it, and he gives me a call halfway through the day. He's like, dude, the whole first group of tests is like, because they grade on the letter system like in school, whole first group is nothing but A's across the board. It's got nothing but A's. This is going to be huge. This is going to be huge. Holy shit. Then the day goes on, and I don't hear from him. And I don't hear from him. And I don't hear from him. And he gets back me for the second part. And he's like, yeah, a lot of B's, a few B minuses, a couple of C's. And that's all it took.
That's all it took?
That's all it took, because
You get a passing grade and you still fail?
Yeah, that's the thing. Nickelodeon doesn't, and by the way, you could say this about Disney, you could say it about Warner Brothers. They don't want B pluses. They want nothing but A's.
Yeah, some of the stuff I see them pump out, I'm like,
you know, I don't even know if they do focus testing. Focus testing has never been a great way of judging anything, as far as I'm concerned.
I was gonna say the way you're describing it to me seems so different the way it is now. With like you getting like having to write out like 2 seasons like synopsises of like a movie, but all these shows like cartoons come out now, they run for like 2 seasons if they're lucky.
yeah,
Oh,
like
yeah,
2 seasons
yeah,
split
yeah.
up.
It's like they make one big season and
Yeah.
they split it up into like 2 or 3.
Yeah, that's what I mean. 1 season split up.
Yeah, and after that you don't hear anything. You know.
You know, it's one of those funny things. It's like they always want to look for some mathematical equation to say this show will definitely be a hit, and that doesn't exist. You know, there's just no way of telling. And you know, it's funny. They're always looking for the magic formula for how to make a hit show. And
SpongeBob.
Yeah, the next SpongeBob.
yeah, well, and what's funny about that is I remember at the time people saying, you know, oh, Cat Dog is going to be the next SpongeBob, or something else was going to be the next SpongeBob. But it was something that looked exactly like SpongeBob, and I'm like, no, the next SpongeBob is going to look nothing like SpongeBob.
Yes. Exactly. Yes.
And consequently, in my opinion, the next SpongeBob was Invader Zim, which looked nothing. And yeah, I mean, it didn't get a ton of seasons, but holy
It has a
cow,
cult following.
the following
Yeah.
is frantic and feverish. And,
See, that's my thought when it comes to like trying to find the next SpongeBob.
Mm-hmm.
It's more about the cult following after the fact. Like give
Yeah.
it the chance, and you'll see where the following brings it. You know.
yeah, you know, again, it's one of those things, and this is why I was very, very, you know, more so than storyboarding, more so than character designing, more so than, you know, I never really considered myself an animator. My quest was to get a show, not because, you know, I was out to become famous, because goodness knows if you want to be famous, animation is the very last
farthest.
industry you should be looking at, but because, you know, in the short time that I had been exposed to the industry, I had noticed that, you know, shows where people were having a good time making it always did better than shows that weren't, or at least the shows came out better.
Yeah.
And that was always my goal. It's like, I want to have a show so that I can create an environment where everybody working on it is having a good time. That's the magic ingredient. And now it's true, sometimes the magic ingredient doesn't work, but most of the time it does. You can watch a show and tell when people are miserable.
Yeah.
Like I could name names, but I'm not going to. But there are plenty of shows out there.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
It's passionless.
Yeah, you're just watching it and you're like, these folks are just collecting a check. Yeah. And by the way, God bless you, you know, Godspeed. But
yeah, everyone's hustling, but it's an idea of like an art renaissance, like an animation renaissance, and that happening anytime soon.
Whatever it is, it's not going to be the way it was before.
No, it's going to be through indie animation.
I think it will be through indie animation.
Yeah.
Because that's the only area where anybody's having any fun.
Yeah, it's where they're having fun, where people can actually get excited and the fan base builds before the product is even finished.
Right.
Like, that's rare.
Right.
You know?
And then because of that, there's like an established fan base, which I assume will make it easier for a network to see potential in picking it up.
Yep.
Or at
Yeah.
least looking at it.
And that's the thing. I mean, I never walked away from any of this stuff, you know, bitterly. I mean, Nickelodeon gave me a huge shot that many people, you know, it began with Fred. I was a complete unknown, and Fred gave me a shot, Nickelodeon gave me a shot, and Nickelodeon treated me really well. You know, and they wanted the show to get picked up. Like, everyone wanted it to. But it becomes a matter of, you know, when you're dealing with corporate America, it's like, how much of a risk are they willing to take?
Yeah.
And most of the time, they're not willing to take a huge risk. But, you know, like I said, we were treated very well. And I think you can tell, especially on My Life as a Teenage Robot, we had a blast making that show.
I love
Fairly OddParents was fun. Invader Zim was fun. You can tell on those shows were successful because there was passion there.
There was
behind it.
drive.
Yeah, even if it doesn't like Invader Zim and Teenage Robot especially did not like run for as many seasons as people want, but it says something when all these years later people are still calling for it, you know.
Absolutely. And again, people always ask me, they're like, why did Nickelodeon cancel it? It's like, Nickelodeon didn't cancel Teenage Robot, it just didn't get a pickup for another season.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference. You know, Nickelodeon gave both those shows a huge shot. Nickelodeon would have loved nothing more than for both those shows to be continuing to this day. So it's not that Nickelodeon sat there and go, ah, we really fuck with these people now. You know, now we're going to dash everyone's hopes and take away their shows. You know, Invader Zim and Teenage Robot got okay ratings, and that's not enough. That's not enough for a juggernaut like Nickelodeon.
Yeah, it seems like they're just like, they get it to the point where it can still be like syndicated and then just stop, like, that's enough.
Yeah.
There's no profit in like keeping it going. But the thing is, now for like the internet and like all these cult fan bases are able to like voice their opinions, is that like all these shows like Teenage Robot will come back eventually. Like we saw with Invader Zim, it got
Clone
like all,
High, Invader Zim, Rocco.
and then Clone High only started getting like a cult following like 2 years ago.
Because the pandemic.
Yeah, and now it's already coming back for a full new season. Now, like Invader Zim getting a whole Netflix movie, or like the Rocco movie, or the Hey Arnold movie.
Yeah,
all these shows are gonna come back and like they're making another Fairly OddParents reboot after like 2 years after, or 1 year after the
After
previous
the
one.
last reboot.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it didn't look very good.
I liked it. I liked the way it looked.
What's funny about this is now, and I'm gonna take a moment here to plug my own podcast.
Please do.
Which is called The Animation Conversation. We have not premiered it yet, but I'm not going to give too much away. But if you are a fan of My Life as a Teenage Robot, if you listen to the upcoming episode where we have an interview with our first guest. Our first interview on the show is going to give some news about my life as a teenage robot that will make you really happy. Maybe not as happy as you think you're gonna be, but it's still pretty darn good. So
Get ready, guys.
even if it doesn't come back as like a full series, there's stuff like Danny Phantom's coming back as a graphic novel, stuff like that, where it's like it's something. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Although Butch Hartman is not involved.
No, he's not.
And I don't even think it's his art style, really.
No, it's not. It's remade. It's completely revamped.
Which it is probably, it sucks, but I guess it always is good to like bring something back after so long and have like a new voice behind it. They can do
Yeah.
Oh, see, I look at Danny Phantom now, and you telling me that almost breaks my heart, and then almost doesn't, because I'm sort of taking all the material that I would have used on Danny Phantom, and I'm using it on a different project of mine that I'll talk about a little bit later. But this is an interesting story. You and I were talking about this kind of when you guys were setting up down there. I was it was at the end of the third or fourth season of the Fairly OddParents when Disney came a knocking, and they're like, we've got this show, American Dragon Jake Long, that needs a director, and by director we don't mean an animation director, we mean someone to run the show from a director standpoint. And I'm like, American Dragon, that sounds so awesome. And I'd become known as the comedy action guy, because I took Fairly OddParents to a place that nobody thought it was ever going to go. I did that. My very first episode was action packed, and in that episode, the script was in all kinds of trouble. And Butch handed it to me, and he's like, "Here's your first episode to direct. Do whatever you want with it. You can change the art style in it. You can rewrite the whole thing, but just make this good." Because it was really good premise, but the script was in bad shape, and he's like, "Just do whatever you want with it." And so when it came to the action scenes, once Timmy wishes himself as an action hero, the whole style of the show changes. But now Timmy's head and everything still stays relatively the same.
You're like 5 o'clock shadow.
He's all buff, and thus begins the constant muscle buffery on the Fairly OddParents. But so no one had really sort of thought that Timmy or anyone in that universe could move in an action-oriented way. But because I was able to break the style of the show, but still remain faithful to it, at least a little bit. Translate it. After that episode, it seemed like every other episode of the Fairly OddParents became an action episode. So I very quickly became known as the comedy action guy, and that's always been my favorite thing, is to combine.
Really funny that you bring that up, because I do remember when I was younger watching Action Packed, I immediately was like, "This is different." But I like this, but this is different.
Yeah.
And then
everybody did. The president of Nickelodeon, and again, everybody, Butch, everyone else, if you remember this differently, I'm really sorry. This is how I remember it, and I fully attribute that I could be getting this wrong. But I was told that the president of Nickelodeon at the time saw Action Packed and was like, "Wow, that episode of Fairly OddParents was great." And then Butch said to him, "Well, imagine what we could do with a movie." And that's how Catastrophe, got its genesis. So
I feel like I've heard that similar story.
Yeah. So I look, even if I'm remembering it in a way that's meant to pump myself up, I don't think that's too far from the truth. Like,
did he say that in our podcast or no?
I didn't say that exactly. But I don't think he talked about it.
No, we didn't talk about Catastrophe.
But anyway, I became known as the action comedy guy. So when American Dragon Jake Long and the people at Disney contacted me about that, I'm like, oh, this is going to be great, because again, you can turn Timmy into an action star only so many times before you're starting to repeat yourself. So I wanted to get myself in on a show where I could really do some action. Yeah, because Kim Possible was big at that time, and I knew that they were sort of grooming American Dragon to follow up Kim Possible. And I'm like, oh, this is awesome, because I thought Kim Possible was a great looking show. And at the same time, the designer behind Kim Possible, who was Steven Silver, was also doing the designs for Danny Phantom.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I was looking at his designs, just going, oh my, because they didn't look like Butch designs. I was like, this is gonna be awesome. This looks amazing. So then Disney calls me with American Dragon, but at the same time, I'm the supervising director on the #2 show in the world for kids right now.
Right.
And I go to Butch, and again, this is how I remember it. I go to Butch, and I go, Butch, I've got this offer over at Disney to do, a comedy action show called American Dragon. And meanwhile, I've had a comedy action show in my head for years that I was like gearing up to put into my own pitch Bible and pitch as my own show. But I was just going to take all those ideas and I was like, Butch, if I will stay here, because Butch really didn't want me to leave. And I was like, Butch, I will stay, but I either want to be in charge of the Fairly OddParents. That is to say, not, obviously just as a producer, not as a, but I want to run Fairly OddParents, or I want to run Danny Phantom.
Yeah.
And my hope was that he was just going to let me do Danny Phantom, because then I could put all this action stuff into that show. And as I recall it, he thought about it. To his credit, he thought about it. Because, again, as a creator, letting go of something is tough.
Yeah.
Especially, your babies. Your two firstborn children. And I think he thought about it, but at the end of the day, I don't think he was able to do it. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to go over to Disney on Jake Long American Dragon. And that's when I left the Fairly OddParents. So now I've got this action show I've been wanting to do in my head this whole time. And I'm like, okay, now I'm going to just pour everything into American Dragon. So I get to American Dragon, and oh my God, what a shit show it was from beginning to end. Yeah, I had producers telling me, well, we want the show to be like Seinfeld. And I'm
American Dragon?
The show's called American Dragon. No one's going to tune into this show for the yada, yada, yada.
Children watching
I don't. So just butting heads with everybody immediately. I redesigned all the characters. The executives at the time hated the way that I redesigned all the characters, because I redesigned them in a way to facilitate the action. Like, this was just going to be a nonstop action show. And they hated it, and I just kept saying to them, look, just let me do the pilot animatic. And if I do the pilot animatic the way I want to do it and you guys hate it, you guys can fire me. And boy, that's exactly what they did. Now, I did that pilot animatic, and my editor and everybody else at Disney who saw it was like, this is one of the best things we've ever seen.
But they just didn't want to pick it up?
But no, the executives and the guys who wanted it to be like Seinfeld, who saw it at the time, none of them are there anymore. The people who saw it and wanted it to be like Seinfeld looked at it and they just saw nothing.
But even the end result wasn't even like Seinfeld, which is like,
no. Well, that's the irony. Yeah. I was summarily fired, and thankfully that's Teenage Robot was good enough to take me on then, and then I discovered, oh, this is great. I get to do action comedy on Teenage Robot. So, but I was kind of humiliated, because I was like, I gave you this great looking thing, and none of you like it. So I walked away, and I was very, again, I left the #2 show in the world for to have my chance to do this thing, and no one's ever going to see it. So then they get someone else to do it, and these people all do great work too, and they did a good enough job to get 2 seasons. But season 1 of American Dragon comes out, and I'm like, oh, well, I guess they really didn't like my ideas, because this looks nothing like what I had in mind. Then season 2 comes out, and I'm like, this looks tremendously like what I had in mind. And again, I don't know that anybody looked at any of my artwork or any of my animatic, but I do think that if they'd have premiered season 1 with the look and feel of season 2, it would have been a more successful show. But
does that animatic that you did for it exist anywhere online, or is it just hidden?
Oh, it's definitely not online, because I mean,
does Disney own
they absolutely 100% own it. There was probably a time where I had a videotape of it, but it has undoubtedly like dissolved ages ago. Yeah.
Somebody go to the Disney Vault and find it right now.
Oh, I would kill to see it again, because I mean, it was in my opinion, a really cool action show.
I wish I could see it, and now I'm curious.
But then what wound up happening there is I very happily, went over to My Life as a Teenage Robot and was having a great time working on that show. And so because I'd now been scorned by both and by the way, going back to Butch, and he did say to me, he's like, look, if you stay, you can have your pick of the litter, like any episode of Danny Phantom you want, any episode of Fairly Odd, you can go back and forth. So it's not like he didn't sort of do his best. Yeah. So I did find that, very, he, like I said, he did his best, and I could have worked on Danny Phantom if I had wanted to, but so instead I never got to put my hands in on Danny Phantom, never really got to put my hands in on American Dragon, so I'm like, well, screw it. I'm going to take all my great material and I'm going to do my action comedy show.
Yeah.
I put it together and created this pitch Bible and went to Warner Brothers. And again, it's one of the few occasions where I sat down and in that first pitch, the executive sitting across from me looked at the pitch, heard the pitch, and he was like, this is going to be the next Harry Potter. And I'm like, oh, okay. So you like it then? And so, it was great.
Yeah.
It was great because you just, I mean, I had pitched a million other things prior to this as well where people were like, oh, this has potential. Oh, this guy really believed in it.
Is this around 2007, 2006?
Yeah, probably more like 2005 or so.
Okay, so that's even more of a bigger deal. If someone says this is
huge,
the next Harry Potter, that's like.
And but it was, I mean, this was my Lord of the Rings. This was my Star Wars. This was my magnum opus. This show, because I had been brewing up all this material over the time. I'd been world building.
Yeah.
And one of the things I love about telling stories and creating is, really, really, really good story. Once you have instigated the Big Bang, it really does take on a life of its own, and you cease to be a writer and you cease to be the creator because the characters just do what they're supposed to do. Yeah. The situations emerge as they would emerge, and you just become a stenographer. So that part of it I was loving, and it showed in the work, because when I showed it to him, he's like, this is epic and this is amazing. I love this idea. So for the next 2 years, the show was in development at Warner Brothers, and it, like so many other things, the industry took another nosedive, and everything at Warner Brothers that wasn't Scooby-Doo or Batman, just kind of got shit canned. But
that seems like such a scary thing, for getting a show. It only seems to have gotten worse.
Yeah.
All the Netflix stuff going on.
Oh.
Yeah, the Netflix draft
poor Bone.
Stuff.
Oh my gosh. They had offices for Bone when I was on the Fairly OddParents. That thing has been around forever. And
that's so upsetting.
It's such a great, I hate to call it property, but it is. I mean, it's right for. I mean,
that art style.
It should have just been a no-brainer.
Oh.
But the good news is, I'm sorry, I'm doing all the talking.
No,
you guys,
I like it. I like hearing it.
Okay.
I mean, we're having a conversation.
What wound up happening is, Warner Brothers dumps it. I pitch it around to few other places. Other places just aren't interested in it. Eventually, after a couple of years, because I had the tantrum and because I had the mojo of having sold a show, and by this time, people had kind of figured out, oh, this is the guy behind the guy. This is the guy who directed Action Packed. This is the guy who directed Abracadastrophe. This is the guy who has been pitching around. We know his name. I had gotten a certain just amount of reputation. Reputation in the industry buzz. I had gotten a reputation as a triple threat, so meaning, I don't know, creator, writer, whatever. And so after that got dropped, the rights reverted back to me, and that's the reason you sell your first show, Lock, Stock, and Barrel, is because it gives you that sort of bargaining posture for the next show that you do. And that's the thing when it comes to. Whenever anyone approaches me, they're like, well, I've got the show, but I'm afraid of someone stealing it. It's like, if you're approaching a big company, it's so much cheaper for them to buy it than it is for them to steal it.
Yeah.
They're not going to steal it. The worst case scenario is they're going to pick it up, they're going to buy it from you, and then they're going to shelve it. That's the worst case scenario.
Yeah, because then you can't do anything with it.
Right.
Yeah.
But tantamount to that, my advice is always, if you've only got one show in you, boy, then you should hold out for a perfect deal, because that first deal is not going to be a perfect deal. So it was because the tantrum wound up being sort of my sacrificial lamb that when, the Warner Brothers one came along, eventually the rights reverted back to me.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. What was that one show where someone pitched their idea, I think was it Nickelodeon, and then they liked it, but then they bought it, and then did something. They pretty much took the idea and made it completely. You know what I'm talking about?
I don't know what you're talking about.
We were talking about this the other day. Whatever, not important.
Ideas are such ethereal things anyway.
Yeah.
And again, to hear me talk about some of my ideas, I'm sure people will go, oh, he thinks he's, so clever. It's just like this idea or that idea. Ideas are just so ethereal. But, what wound up happening was, like I said, that was of all the shows I've created. I went on to create other stuff and pitch other stuff, and other stuff got picked up and put into various degrees of development. But there really is a reason it's called development hell. Like, you'll get a studio interested in your idea and your story, and it'll be years before anyone makes a decision about it.
Oh.
And that whole time you're just, you can't live off the money from that. And by the way, this whole time, like the money I got for the Tantrum was really pretty good, but from that point on, the dollar amounts for literally like buying a show just started to plummet.
Yeah.
And so you can't live off of, hey, I've got a show in development. Like, that's just not money. So the whole time you've got a show in development and you still have to hustle.
Yeah.
And when you've got a show in development, there are nonstop like, hey, we need you to come here for a meeting with the European partners at blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, but I'm doing revisions for this show. I can't just drop it and run out the door. So it's just the whole industry from, whether it seems like you can either be someone who is like, I am a storyboard artist and that is what I will do for the entirety of my career, or a director or a background designer or whatever it is, or you can do what I tried to do, which was I want to get my own show so I can tell my own stories. But that's a whole rat race in and of itself.
Yeah.
The industry, there are no free lunches in it. It's rough all around.
I'm curious, what do you feel like, I know you're like been as far away from the industry for like 15 years now.
Yeah.
Do you think it is easier to pitch a show and get it picked up now or then? When you were
I mean, to get a show picked up?
Yeah.
I think it's probably murder to get a show picked up now, just because there's, because Jay Lender said this, and this was absolutely true. Back then there weren't that many people who were interested in being in animation in the first place.
Yeah.
There just weren't that many. So we were kind of a rare breed. Whereas now there's just, there's
everyone wants
people,
to.
which is again, it's why I was kind of like, okay, I've pitched all my best stuff. I'm kind of tired of the development aspect of it. I still like storyboarding and I still like directing. Like, it's a good way to make a living. It beats flipping burgers. And it was around that time where I started becoming almost entirely a freelancer, and I became like the king of pilots. I was just doing pilot after pilot after pilot. And those are fun in so much as you get to sort of help create the portion of the show, but then by the same token, I've done at this point probably 60 pilots, and 3 of them have ever made it to the air. One of the pilots that I did was Super Noobs, which was on Cartoon Network for like a half a minute, and that's an example of one that actually made it through. There were a ton of others that didn't, but then there was another one. My last official show that I did a pilot for before me and my wife literally were like, we both had it with LA, let's move. You're doing freelance anyway. The technology had finally gotten to the point where, you weren't shipping huge boxes of storyboards back and forth. It was all digital. And she's like, you can work from anywhere. Let's get out of LA. Let's move to New York. And it was literally right around that time that I had gotten asked to storyboard one half of the pilot of Rick and Morty.
Yeah.
And boy, talk about one of the pilots I did that wound up being successful, and now again, this is one of those things. I'm gonna say this, and it sounds like I'm making it bigger than it should be, but this is how I remember it. How I remember it was, Adult Swim was not really getting the show. Like, they didn't get it. They didn't get the humor of it because they didn't have an animatic. They only had a script, and so it was only after me and the other guy that they got brought in to do boards, did the storyboards for it, that they got it.
I was
The
going to
show's
say,
like-
the show is very like, it's all in like the voice performance and the art. So,
Yeah.
So just reading a script must be like just nonsense.
It would-
Yeah, well, and one of the things they told me in particular about my boards and why, you know, I got to, you know, be on that first episode of that show was, what I was told was they saw me making the characters act, and they saw the staging and whatnot, the way that I did that. You know, they had been toying with other people and having other people, you know, make the characters act, and no one was getting that down. And the most perfect example of that I can think of is, you know, there's two scenes that I love to point out that I'm super proud of on that first episode of Rick and Morty, and it's a one where the dad goes to the wife's job because he wants to try and convince her to put Rick into an old folks home, and she's a horse heart surgeon, of course. So he interrupts an operation to walk in, and he's got a pamphlet with a nursing home in on it. And what's funny is I remember, you know, being handed that, and the script said, you know, she's operating on a horse, and I'm like, well, how does that work? I mean, horses, you know, it's not like, do they lay on the side? And so I researched it, and they tie their legs up in the air. And I remember turning that in, and all the directors looking at that going, wait a minute, why are the legs tied up like that? I'm like, that's how they perform surgery on horses. They're like, you researched that? I'm like, well, yeah, that's my job. So I'm really proud of it for that reason. But the acting in that whole scene, there's a whole just a spectrum of emotions that go on there, because he's trying to like sneak something past his wife, and the only reason she's not seeing that that's happening is because she's literally got a horse's heart in her hands, and you've got the assistant that's bothering her, you know, talking in her ear. Yeah. And just that whole exchange is a great little example of subtle acting and how you can sell characters. And then, of course, the second one I'm most proud of is the ending scene of the show, where it's Rick saying, truth is, Morty, you're dumb as a stump, and the beans or whatever that Morty had shoved up his ass cease to work, and he starts flailing around in the ground, and it's Rick getting in his face with the flickering light behind him, going, Rick and Morty forever, Rick and Morty. And that was my scene, and that was my shot. And those were the things that sort of, again, not only sold the directors. The director was like, oh, now we get this, but the executive was like, oh, okay, we get this now. So that it was kind of nice that was my swan song leaving Los Angeles, because it turned out to be such a huge success.
Yeah, I noticed when we were walking in, you had near your front door. I don't know if this was from that, but it was a little drawing of all the shows you had worked on, and it was you flipping it.
I love that drawing so much.
Have you ever showed that online?
No, I really need to. My good friend Sean Murray, who I owe that guy a lot, because when my first real job in the industry was at Klasky Chupo on the Wild Thornberries, and I mentioned to you that I had been working in a CD-ROM studio, and I knew when I came out to LA, I didn't come out to LA to work on CD-ROMs. I came out to LA to work on cartoons.
It wasn't your drive to work on Free Willy?
The whole time I was working at the CD-ROM studio, I was beating the pavement with all the studios and having, by the way, just terrible luck. Oh. Like I took tests for Cat Dog and Angry Beavers and just all these things that I was like, I'm perfect for Angry Beavers. What's wrong with you people? Nobody wanted anything to do with me. But finally, Klasky Chupo is like, well, you want to be a character designer? We don't need character designers. We need board artists. Can you do storyboards? And I was like, yes. Even though I'd never done a storyboard before in my life. And so when I got hired, I did a test, and apparently I did a good enough job, so they hired me on the Wild Thornberries, but suddenly I have no idea what I'm doing. Yeah. And, bless his heart, the guy that they happened to sit me next to was Sean Murray, and he wound up being sort of my little partner at Klasky Chupo for my tenure on the Wild Thornberries. Like, he would do one half of a show, and I would do the other half, and we shared an office, and he's one of my dearest, oldest friends, and we're still buddies to this day. So yeah, when the date came for Lee and I and our two dogs to move from LA to New York, he did that drawing of me and all the shows that I've worked on, sort of saying goodbye to us while me and my wife are popping him the finger.
It's a great illustration. Yeah. Oh yeah, that was like the first thing I noticed too.
Go on. Really quick, because I know we're like running out of battery. We have like 15 minutes left. Tell me about you're doing now with the mentorship.
Well, that's funny because that ties in with the whole action show that I've always wanted to do. You know, I've only been really truly active on Twitter for the past couple of years, and I've been on Discord a little bit that whole time as well, because I discovered the Teenage Robot Discord server, and just the fans there are super nice. Teenage Robot fans are just the nicest people you'll ever meet. So hi guys. So so I've been looking at all of, you know, looking at Twitter and looking at Discord, and I've been thinking to myself this whole time, it's like, gosh, you know, there's all this undiscovered talent out there. Like I connect with all these, like, you know, hopeful animators and hopeful board artists and stuff who couldn't get their foot in the door in the industry in any way, because they didn't go to CalArts, because they didn't go to Sheridan, because they didn't live in LA. Which was me, by the way. I didn't go to school for animation. I was not part of the CalArts mafia, and that's why I was so grateful to Fred Cyber, because I was an outsider, and I know what it's like to be the outsider who doesn't have the training that all these guys have. My degree is just in art, so I just looking at all this amazing talent and thinking to myself, gosh, you know, there's all these people who want to be in the industry, but they can't get any experience, because it's that whole paradox of you can't get a job without experience, and you can't get experience without a job. So I had been in the back of my mind thinking, it'd be so easy to just make a pilot with people, with all just people who just want to do it for the experience. But I was like, nah, how would that work? And blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And then finally, literally just like a few weeks ago, I had finally just sort of said, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to give this a try, and I'm going to see what happens. And so I literally just put out a call on Twitter saying, hey, you know, if you're out there and you want some work experience and you are willing to do work in exchange for one-on-one mentorship with me, then I have projects that are sitting around just gathering dust. You know, I have these shows that, you know, everyone looked at and everyone thought was great. And so I just put the call out, and I figured, you know, maybe 4 or 5 people would respond and go, oh yeah, I'll do that. We're at 75 people now already have come forward. And so we've gone from being this just little rinky-dink idea in my head to, you know, we've set up a virtual studio on Discord where I've got directors, I've got board artists, character designers, development artists, background artists, production crew. Like they're all just working as a workable studio, and everyone's having a blast. Like, people are becoming friends, and people are helping connect with each other and learning new skills. And the whole time I'm giving them one-on-one, you know, sort of mentorship, and sort of teaching them the ropes of the industry. We are treating it as though we are working in a studio and making a show. So we've got 3 what I call flagship shows. We're in the process of creating 3 pilots and then a bunch of quickie shorts. And one of those pilots will be the show that was in development at Warner Brothers for so many years. Can you say what it's called? It's called Nightmare Hunters, and I'm really looking forward to... and again, it's one of those shows, you say the name and you can get the show right away. It's called Nightmare Hunters. It's about 2 kids who hunt nightmares. And like I said, everything that I would have put into Danny Phantom, everything that I would have put into American Dragon Jake Long is going right into that. Oh. And look, I've said it 1,000 times, this whole thing could just crash and burn, or we could put the pilot out and it could look amazing, but it could just flop. People could look at it and go, doesn't matter, we're having a blast, and it's just the greatest thing. Yeah, it's a learning experience. Huge learning experience. Working as a team. Yeah, working as a team. Yeah, and by the way, I'm getting to learn as well, because one of the things I should mention, coming June 17th on Cartoon Network, is the pilot that I've been doing for Cartoon Network. It's going to be the first cartoon that, apart from myself, was produced entirely in Africa. Wow. Called Garbage Boy and Trash Can. And I'm the supervising producer on that show, but everybody else is in Africa. And that's what sort of gave me the idea. It's like, wow, I can supervise people who are a continent away and still have this thing coming. And by the way, if you're a fan of things like Dexter's Lab and the old school Cartoon Network, this is going to be right up your alley. So be on the lookout for that. But that's what gave me the idea. It's like, wow, this was a great experience. If I can do that, you know, with internationally, I can do this on Discord. And so it's an exciting time. Guys, I think you should really look forward to Nightmare Hunters, but also if you also want to be a part of this experience. Yeah, because what I've said before is we're starting out with my little flagship shows, and if this all goes well, because right now it's super important just for all kinds of legal reasons that everything be created by me so that there's not a lot of quibbling, well, I did this and I did that, and that no money is exchanging hands. We're all just doing it for fun. However, if these 3 pilots come out and there's a success, and even if it just proves successful as a mentorship program and helps people get work, I'm going to keep it going. And Fountain's Pen Productions is going to start taking pitches from other people.
Yeah.
And that's when things are going to get really interesting. So, again, this is me using myself as the guinea pig. My shows are the guinea pig. And if this works out, other people are going to bring their shows to me, and I'm going to become my own little Fred Cyber.
Which is incredible.
And that's what I say. Indie animation, the whole, this ties back in with what I was talking about, that's where the fun is, and that is going to be the whole goal. And it's like, yes, if it becomes huge, that'll be great. But the one thing that we're going to be committed to from day one to the final day is that we're only going to do it for as long as it's fun.
Because that's really what indie animation comes down to, is creating, being passionate and being free and open to create whatever you'd like.
Yeah.
And share it with those who also appreciate that kind of creation and passion.
Yep.
So it's, I'm excited. I'm excited.
I am too. And I feel really, really blessed and grateful that, like I said, I thought maybe 4 or 5 people were going to volunteer. We got 75 people, and they're all super excited. And I just get to sit back. I'm not going to take, the only credits I'm going to take are created by an executive producer. The directors are directing, the board artists are boarding, the supervisors are supervising. My production crew is holding everything up. And like I said, everyone's having a blast. And I feel grateful that this is all happening at a point in my life where I've just got nothing to prove. If it tanks, if it goes south, it doesn't matter to me. And no matter what, everyone else will have gotten experience. And I've pledged myself to anyone who works, who takes part in this program. By golly, I will sing your praises to every network. I'll write you a letter of recommendation. I'll do whatever it takes to help you get your foot in the door in the industry where you weren't able to do it before.
That's so admirable of you. Yeah.
People say that, oh, it's so great what you're doing, or it's so admirable. I'm not doing it to be, admirable. I'm having a blast.
But that's why it's admirable. You just want to have fun and be able to provide experience and help others learn, and like...
I can't believe nobody's done it before this. That's the thing. And maybe I'm going to find out tomorrow, we've been doing this over here. It's like, oh, okay, good. Then I'm happy that there's more of this going on, because, we're having such a great time, and I've said it before, that is the magic ingredient to animation.
Yeah.
When people are having a good time making it shows through in the work.
True.
Sounds great then. Can't wait to see it.
Yeah, honestly. If not, would you like to plug anything else?
Yes, please. What I desperately want to get going is support in the YouTube community. So Fountain Cartoons, please go there, like, share, subscribe, because when we premiere these pilots, and by the way, before the pilots, we're going to start releasing little quickie shorts and stuff. Like, the Fountain Cartoons channel is going to become its own, like, little miniature network of just really wonky stuff. And there's some funny stuff up there right now, but it's just kind of a mishmash of nonsense that I've been doing. But please like, share, and subscribe. Tell your friends. Get the word started, because the second if this thing ever becomes monetized, I've pledged it, and you guys will have this. I will never keep a dime for myself. I don't need the money. I don't want the money. If it makes any money, it's going to go to everyone who's working in the program. So
there's a link in the description. So click on that link and describe.
And I appreciate you letting us come over. Guys, the road trip, it's continuing.
This is letting us the All-American road trip.
And visit. Yeah.
All right. So long, everyone.
Zig-a-zing out, party people.